What's up, guys? Welcome back to another Salt and Pauper video, and today we are going to take a look at the first place deck from the Pauper Challenge last weekend, which was Walls, piloted by none other than the absolute madman himself. We're going to continue our Beating the Meta series by taking a deep dive into this really powerful combo deck and gearing you up for how best to play against it. Now that it's posted to first place very recently, you're likely to see more of these popping up in your leagues. And I want to give you the tools and understanding of the deck and how it functions so that you can play as well as possible and pad out your win rate against this combo deck. So let's dive right in. All right, first up for Walls, this is a green-blue combo deck. But it does have cards of pretty much every color. You have white cards coming out of the sideboard as well as red and black cards in the main board. So this is a 5-color combo deck. However, it runs only basic forests for basic land. You'll see it runs a full 12 basic lands here. It also runs a singleton Holdout Settlement. This is a land that produces colorless, but you can tap it and tap any untapped creature you control. But you can tap it and tap any uncapped creature you control, and it makes 1 mana of any color. It just kind of helps open up your colors in the early game. Really give you an opportunity to make more than just green mana from a lot of your ramp sources. Speaking of those ramp sources, we have a ton of them. We are going to go through here and look at all of the ramp, and then we'll kind of circle back to some of the other combo pieces and talk about what they do. First piece of ramp is going to be Avacyn's Pilgrim. This is a green mana elf, essentially, that taps for white mana. Next, we have Quirion Ranger. This doesn't look like a ramp card, but ultimately, when you're pairing it with things like Cerulean Caretaker, Overgrown Battlement, Rift Sower, Axebane Guardian, ultimately what's going to end up happening is you're going to be untapping things that make mana to make more mana. Speaking of, Cerulean Caretaker is a 0/3 that allows you to tap it and another creature to make a mana of any color. Tinderwall is a 0/3 that allows you to sacrifice it to make red mana. Overgrown Battlement allows you to tap it to make green mana for each defender you control. And then we have Axebane Guardian, which allows you to tap it for X mana in any combination of colors, where X is the number of creatures you control. And then we also have Rift Sower, which allows you to tap it for any color and has Suspend. Now that is a lot of mana, so what are we doing with that mana? Well, firstly, we are going to use Orochi Leafcaller to filter our green mana into mana of any color. Now what that's going to let us do is cast all of the rest of our spells. Once we've established a decent board and we can generate a lot of mana, the idea is to generate infinite mana. We do that by comboing Axebane Guardian with a couple of other options. We have Freed from the Real, Galvanic Alchemist. And what these two things do is they both allow you to essentially untap the creature to go infinite. Freed from the Real is an enchantment that allows you to tap enchanted creature or untap enchanted creature for a blue. And then Galvanic Alchemist allows you to pay 3 mana after it's soulbound to something to untap that creature. So what this allows you to do is you tap Axebane for X blue mana. As long as it's more than 3, you are netting mana on each rotation, and that allows you to go infinite. You can also do this with some combination of Overgrown Battlement and Orochi Leafcaller in a bind, but primarily the idea is to use Axebane Guardian. Next up, what do you do with all of that mana? Well, firstly, you have the easy one, which is Valakut Invoker. This just allows you to pay 8 mana, deal 3 damage to any target. You're just going to burn out your opponent for infinite damage once you make infinite lands, or once you make infinite mana. That's the easy win right on the spot. You also have Vivian's Grizzly, which allows you to pay 4 mana to look at the top card of your library. And if it's a creature or planeswalker, you can reveal it, put it in your hand. If you don't put the card in your hand, put it on the bottom of your library. So this allows you to wheel through your deck to find all of your creatures so that you can find Valakut Invoker so that you can kill them. As far as draw spells or things that are going to let you get to that combo, or things that are going to let you get to that combo, we have a full package of 4 Winding Ways, which allows you to look at the top 4 cards, pick land or creature, and put all of those type of cards revealed in the top 4 into your hand. Then we have Lead the Stampede, which looks at the top 5. This is going to let you put all creatures from those top 5 into your hand. We also have Shield Wall Sentinel, a new card from Dominaria United. This is a defender that allows you to tutor for other defenders. So you can pull any piece of your combo. You'll know that Axebane Guardian has defender. Tuk Tuk Rumble for it, which allows you to give all of your creatures haste, has defender. But primarily you're going to be using this to grab an Axebane Guardian. Alternatively, you can use this to grab a Drift of Phantasms, which allows you to transmute for 3. And 3 mana will get you all the pieces of your combo. It will get you the Axebane Guardian, the Galvanic Alchemist, the Freed from the Real, or the Valakut Invoker. As a backup plan, you have this combination between Reaping the Graves and Repository Scab. Repository Scab is a card that allows you to exploit a creature when it enters the battlefield, and then if you do, return an instant or sorcery from your graveyard to your hand. You combo this with Reaping the Graves, and that allows you to pretty much infinitely recur your creatures as long as they remain in your graveyard and aren't exiled. That is also 3 mana, so you can tutor it with a Transmute from Drift of Phantasms if needed. The last alternate win condition is Secret Door, which allows you to pay 5 mana and venture into the dungeon. Now, there are several dungeons, although this doesn't let you into the Undercity like the Initiative. This is the original dungeon for Adventures in the Forgotten Realms. There are a few different kinds. You're going to be focused on the one that makes an opponent lose 1 life. You're going to be activating this an not infinite number of times, because one of the last cards of that dungeon says draw a card on it, which means that you can only do it for the number of times that your deck has cards to draw. However, in most cases, this is going to be enough to just outright kill your opponent on the combo turn. Outside of that, there is a secondary dungeon which says both players lose 2. During the original dungeon, you gain life, so you were able to set up a life differential and say your opponent has too much life to kill before you run out of cards in your deck. You can then swap to the other dungeon and drain both players until, ideally, they are dead before you are. At the end of the day, this is a really explosive combo deck. It looks to capitalize on early mana sources and ramp out very, very quickly, but it is a creature-based combo deck, which means at its core, it is vulnerable to removal. Now, obviously, this Reaping the Graves and Repository Scab backup plan is going to allow them to rebuy those creatures from the graveyard, but because it's only running 13 lands and a whole lot of mana-producing 1-drops, if you can wipe the board 2 or 3 times, and I know that's a big ask, 2 or 3 times is a lot, but generally speaking, it has enough gas to refill 1 to 2 times. So in order to 100% shut this deck out, you need to be able to wipe the board 2 to 3 times on average. Generally speaking, if you can wipe the board the first time and slow them down, you're able to get enough time to gather up some resources and keep responses open. The other idea you can have to target this deck is to counter the blue spells. That means Pyroblast has a lot of utility here. You'll notice that almost all of the win conditions, but all of the combo conditions contain blue. So Secret Door is one of 2 win conditions combined with Valakut Invoker. One of them is blue. Freed from the Real and Galvanic Alchemist are both blue, as well as the Repository Scab for the backup plan is blue. So countering these blue spells can completely shut down the deck. Now, there are ways for it to go sub-infinite and just generate abhorrent amounts of mana using Quirion Ranger, Axebane Guardian, Overgrown Battlement without ever going infinite in order to use Vivian's Grizzly to create a huge board and eventually hit a Valakut Invoker, or find the Secret Door and go through the dungeon without being infinite. It's just a slower version of death, but unless you can provide pressure in the air or through their life total in some other way, you're likely just going to get drained out slowly. Ultimately, Interacting with this deck's creatures and stopping these two blue spells, Galvanic Alchemist and Freedom from Real, will win a lot of the matchups against this deck. Taking a look at the sideboard, you can see what this deck is afraid of. So in the sideboard, we have 3 Crimson Acolytes. This is very clearly against red. It is a protection from red, run 1 for 2. It says target creature gains protection from red until end of turn. This is obviously against the very popular burn deck. But it also does have some amount of application against removal. You'll notice that Axebane Guardian here is a 0/3. That means it is very vulnerable to all of the best removal spells available in Pauper, i.e. Lightning Bolt, Galv Blast. All of those damage-based spells can hit this. So Crimson Acolyte will make it really, really difficult to remove that creature. Obsidian Acolyte is another one. Same thing, but with black. Protection from black. Target creature gains protection from black. This can stop snuff outs, cast downs, all of those good things. Really important to know that these 2 cards can come in if your plan is spot removal based or even board wipe based. This can give protection from a card like Pestilence. This can give protection from something like a Scarp Clan Shaman. Next up, we have a single Ray of Revelation. This is just a destroy target enchantment. Now, obviously, the deck can use this against something like Boggles, which is a fairly good matchup and can provide a lot of pressure in this deck. But ultimately, one of the biggest weaknesses to this deck is Pestilence, and this is definitely going to come in to deal with those. Standard Bearer is another version of the Obsidian Acolyte and Crimson Acolyte, but in a different way. Instead of allowing things to gain protection from a color, this just makes your opponent choose a target that is a flag bearer when casting a spell. So this is going to be a one-time protection against things like removal, bolts, cast downs, snuff outs, things like that. This is also very good against Boggles, which, as I mentioned before, is a pretty good matchup against this deck. So you need a little bit of protection there. This forces them to enchant all of their auras onto this. Next up is Gorilla Shaman. Obviously, this is in against Affinity, but because you make so much mana, there's actually some additional utility here. This XX1 actually looks a lot less scary when you're making, 8, 10, 15 mana a turn off of a couple of Overgrown Battlements and some Quirion Rangers. At the end of the day, you're going to have a lot of options for this Gorilla Shaman target, and while Affinity is definitely on the chopping block, so is something like Tron, where you can hit Energy Refractors for 5 mana and not really think twice about it. So keep an eye on the Gorilla Shamans coming in out of the board. Next, we have Healer of the Glade, which is a 1/2 that allows you to gain 3 life when it enters the battlefield. This is just to slow the game down just a little bit, mainly against things like Burn. You also have a Singleton of Moments piece, which allows you to buy some extra time against some Alpha Strike decks like Boros, as well as things like Hot Dogs or, again, Boggles. Pulse of Marasa gives you some additional inevitability. It allows you an instant speed buyback similar to Reaping the Graves, but in green. It also gains life, so it's good against those burn decks if you need just a little bit more to eke out enough time to put together the combo. It's also just going to be one more way you can recur some of your end game threats to continue the loop or continue the combo. And then lastly, we have a Singleton of Nylea's Disciple. This is a 3/3 for 4. When it enters the battlefield, you gain life equal to your devotion to green. Because this is primarily a green deck, you're going to have a lot of devotion to green. Green pips on the battlefield are going to be big for you. So this usually gains a considerable amount of life and can give you, the turn or turns that you need to get there in order to finish off the game. So the ideal turn for this deck is usually turn 4 or 5. However, the deck can combo out on turn 3 with a perfect draw, so just keep an eye out for some turn 2 Axebane Guardian plays, because it can combo out of nowhere, especially when paired with a Quirion Ranger. So just be aware of how fast the combo deck works, where its interaction points are. Obviously, these blue spells are very, very important to the success of this deck. And be advised that gaining infinite life is a realistic way to outlast this deck. Like I said, it isn't infinite in the dungeons it can delve because it has to draw cards when it does so. And then the second dungeon, it has options to that deal damage to both players. So if you are at an infinite or sub-infinite amount of life that is, you know, in the hundreds of thousands, they're not going to be able to combo you through the dungeon. So it limits their win condition specifically to Valakut Invoker. So keep that in mind, because that is something that you can look out for, especially if you're on something like Familiars or Altertron, where you can just storm infinitely and go with a Weather the Storm for a huge amount. Very important to be aware of those type of outs, especially when playing paper Magic. But that's it today, guys. We did a quick dive into the Walls deck and how to beat it, its key interaction points, and some decent matchups to maybe play, or key cards that you can play to target, identify, and increase your win rate against this deck. I hope very much that this was beneficial to you and that you learned something about the deck and how it operates. As usual, guys, if you've made it this long, please consider subscribing. Hit the button down below, and I'll see you guys next week for another video. As usual, guys, goodbye forever, unless I see you next time.